So yep, I'm Will from the National Poetry Library. So before I start and introduce the library, I'm actually going to start with a quote. I forgot to put it on a slide, but it's from a book called Shelf Documents, Art Library as Practice, edited by Hinrichs, Tang, and Haynes. And it's from the introduction, which I think was written collaboratively. And the quote says, "We reject the library as a space of silence. The fixity of the printed word is made alive by the spoken word, the sounds where the resonance of the body is present," which I thought was a really nice little quote, and kind of, I think it stuck with me while we've been doing a lot of this work in the library. As Storm mentioned, the presentation is going to have a few very short snippets from the collection, just so you can get an idea of a flavour of what's going on. So without further ado, we'll have a clip from the one and only Lana Del Rey.
I left my city for San Francisco. Took a free ride off a billionaire's jet.
So that was from Lana's Violet Bent Backwards Over the Grass, released in 2020. There was a book that accompanied the record as well, which we also have in the library. So as many of you may know, the National Poetry Library is located on level 5 in the Royal Festival Hall in London's South Bank Centre, and it's the largest public collection of modern and contemporary poetry in the world. It's free and open to everyone, both to browse and to borrow, so I strongly encourage you to come and do both. And the collection holds a wide variety of materials dating back to 1912, including books, pamphlets, magazines, journals, postcards, posters, and ephemera. We even have a bar of soap in the rare books room with a little word inscribed on it. And of course, of audio on cassette, CD, and vinyl, and it's the latter of these that we're going to look at here. So I'm going to start in 2016, when the library was given Arts Council funding to digitize a large part of its collections, including its extensive holdings of audio material on outdated vinyl and cassette formats. Although the organizing and sending of the cassettes proved quite straightforward, preparing the vinyl for digitization revealed that aspects of this collection needed a bit of attention. While some of the vinyl had been catalogued and made accessible to the public, around half of the library's LPs were uncatalogued and held separately in a rare books room, accessible only to staff, so kind of invisible to the public. The accessible LPs were not particularly visible and stored inappropriately in a section of the library separate to the technology required to listen to them. So it was clear that some work would be needed to ensure this unique, visually impactful collection could be properly preserved and presented in the future. And this digitization project gave us an opportunity to look at this part of the collection with fresh eyes. To prepare for digitization, an inventory spreadsheet was drawn up for the vinyl holdings, detailing which LPs had or hadn't been catalogued or already digitized. Some LPs had been migrated onto CD during a past project. And in July 2018, the undigitized LPs were sent to an outsourced audio specialist for their contents to be transferred onto 2 external hard drives. The LPs were returned to the library in November 2018, along with their digital copies. So with all the vinyl in one place and a comprehensive inventory of the LP holdings, it felt like an appropriate time to assess what the library could do with this rich but somewhat neglected collection. And essentially there were 4 areas that needed to be worked on. So one was finding appropriate storage for the material, both in terms of location and housing. Cataloging and processing the backlog of LPs, which due to time I'm not going to go into here, but do ask if you're interested in that side of things. Collection development to ensure continued currency and relevance of the collections, and then of course promotion to draw attention to the collection. And now we're going to have a clip from 5 Nights of Bleeding from Dreadbeat and Blood by Poet in the Roots, which is Linton Kwesi Johnson's first studio album, if I'm not mistaken.
Music blazing, sounding, thumping, fire, blood.
So prior to the digitization project, the library's approach to storing these records favored preservation over access, which is understandable given the fragile nature of this material and the common perception of them as an obsolete format, which I suppose that perception has changed quite a lot over the last few years. Long-term planning for the digitization project contributed to this approach. So the logic was to keep these hard copies as masters that no one touched, and to provide public access to the audio through the digitized copies. As a result, a large number were stored in the library's rare books room, inaccessible and invisible to the public, and this meant that over time they were no longer prioritized by staff, with many among them left uncatalogued. So a lot of staff weren't really aware of what was in the collection either. By keeping these tactile visual objects out of public reach, we were limiting the potential for engagement with this rich and, in my mind, wonderful resource. Although we had the digitized content, this was only really half the story, restricting access to the record covers and liner notes, and on a very basic level, just making this collection hard for people to find or even be interested in. It was clear that the best method of sharing and promoting this unique collection was to let the objects speak for themselves on the shelves. So, as I mentioned, the LPs that had been catalogued and that were publicly accessible at this time were stored inappropriately in no particular order. They were stored vertically between bookends on a shelf with their spines facing outwards. The small size and flimsy nature of these bookends meant that the LPs didn't have much support, so they'd often slide around when you tried to get them out, putting them at risk of damage. This arrangement also made the LPs difficult to browse. It was difficult to pull the covers out to look at them without disrupting how they were balanced between the bookends. On top of this, the records were stored at far removed from the related materials such as CDs, tapes, and DVDs, and more importantly, separated from the turntable necessary to listen to them. So it was a bit all over the place. The pandemic put a pause to these considerations until in 2021, galvanized by the prospect of reopening after lockdown, as I'm sure many of you in this room were, we ordered a new storage unit for the vinyl records from IKEA, which you can see here. This gave us many more options for storage and display, with doors to protect the records from sunlight, and we liaised with South Bank Centre's design team to draw up some colourful custom signage for the shelves. We had to do a bit of work modifying this unit to avoid the hinges of the doors scratching the covers of the records, which I'll show you in a second. And we installed this unit in the audiovisual section of the library, where library users can now comfortably and easily browse the records and listen to them on our turntable. This position now also allows us to create displays of vinyl records that tie into current exhibitions in the library. So here are a few pictures. So you can see at the far end, there's the original IKEA storage unit, a classic Billy, but then you can get them to include doors, which we were absolutely amazed by. You can see my colleague Russell used some foam board to stop the hinges damaging and scraping record sleeves. Very handy man. And here you can see how the sort of records can tie into our exhibition space. So our current exhibition is called Poets in Vogue, focusing on the fashion choices of 8 women poets, and 3 of the poets are represented by the display here. So Sylvia Plath on the left, in the middle you've got Edith Sitwell, and then on the right you've got Stevie Smith. The records as objects are a perfect fit among other items on display, which in this instance include a skirt once owned and worn by Sylvia Plath, which you can see in the display case there. This is a good demonstration of how this collection can enhance the visual side of the library's activity, and the breadth of the collection means that we can be versatile in what we use here. So, for example, during an exhibition of interactive poetry games, we displayed a record by Alison Knowles, a Fluxus artist, who encouraged other artists to perform inside the works that she made. Inevitably, this position comes with risks. So now that we're favouring access over preservation, there have been reports of damaged records, especially on weekends when we're busy with children. So this is a note from my colleague Nina. Hi Will, a patron noticed some kids playing around with the record player and saw them push the needle down onto this record, and it's a beautiful record. Stevie Smith, look at that cover. I spoke to them, but this was too late. There's a scratch on side 1. He says it's still playing, but it's skipping, so not sure if there's a fix. So we're currently looking at solutions to this. With the most likely being the approach taken in a lot of record stores, keeping the covers out for display for people to browse and to attract attention to the collection, but keeping the LPs themselves in protective sleeves behind the desk where library users can request to listen to them, and then we can have a conversation with them to make sure that they're confident in using the equipment. Hopefully this will help us achieve the balance between celebrating and sharing this collection while keeping the items safe from harm. So as you can see, this is all still a work in progress, balancing preservation and access for these fragile materials in a special collection within the fairly small, family-friendly public space of the library. But as you'll see shortly, making this collection more visible has helped us engage with new audiences across a variety of disciplines. So now we'll just have a little extract from third poem from Anton Bruhin's speech poems, Fruity Music.
Say a poem. Say poem. 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 Poem or poem. Do get a wet you bow, get better the lunar straw, beam to babu, get out leader, jogger, jogger for.
So while rehousing the vinyl collection, we're also working hard to develop it, and it's something that we're continuing to do. Prior to the digitization project, the library's vinyl collection was largely historical, consisting of items produced between the 60s and 80s, predominantly by record labels such as Cademan and Argo, who specialized in releasing spoken word recordings by well-established artists such as T.S. Eliot, Dylan Thomas, Edith Sitwell, and many others. Here's an example. The World of Sir John Betjeman. I noticed that Betjeman was the editor of the pamphlet series that you showed earlier for the holidays, and I feel like this is a good, he's in holiday mode. I feel like this is a really good example of how they don't make them like they used to. It's like a, I don't know who is behind this, but it's one of my favorite record sleeves from this sort of archival collection because it's a really bizarre choice. Yeah, but there's many more gems, as you might expect. So a large number of these records came to the library by way of a donation from Hammersmith Public Library at some point in the past, presumably during a weeding process of material that was deemed obsolete. A few contemporary records could be found among these, including releases by Holly Pester, Ursula K. Le Guin, and The Last Poets. However, these newer releases were outliers. But as you can see, here's a few other examples of slightly less mad record covers from the archival collection, just showing you how amazing a resource it already was, and such a nice thing to be able to build on. So it's just such a nice range of things going on, and stuff that it would be hard to know where to listen to anywhere else, really. So once an annual budget had been set for building this collection, we set about researching currently active record labels specializing in poetry, some of which you can see here: Nymphs and Thugs, Phonograph, Pearl Home Records, and Recital, as well as identifying gaps in our collection that we'd missed before. We cast our net wide, using information sources outside our usual channels to ensure that what we collected reflected the diversity of text and sound being produced, resulting in a huge range of new acquisitions on vinyl, both old and new. So, for example, we got stuff from Simon Armitage's band, some reissues of Nicky Giovanni records, a Luke Wright record, Jean Binter Breeze, and loads more. All of the extracts played throughout this presentation are from records collected during this process, so both new releases and older ones. And developing this collection has helped us connect with members of the poetry community we hadn't been in touch with before, such as the aforementioned record labels, opening potential avenues for new and interesting collaborations. And you can see a few more of the additions to the collection behind me here, sort of mix of reissues and new things. It's been a really fun process. Sorry about the quality of the Nicky Giovanni image there, it's a bit pixelated. One of the most satisfying parts of this process has been tracing different lineages and influences across this collection. So these histories on record are just as vital as those that flow between the books on the shelves, telling a different part of the same story. So you can hear Linton Kwesi Johnson's influence on Roger Robinson, for example, Henri Chopin's influence on Felicia Atkinson, and Amiri Baraka's influence on Anthony Joseph. So the collection is now perfectly placed for practicing poets and musicians to discover these rich sonic histories and take up the mantle themselves. And now we're going to hear a little bit of Felicia Atkinson from Image Language.
A tall motorway, petroleum pumps and bridges.
So we've worked hard over the last few years to draw people's attention and encourage this kind of creative engagement with the collection. The most immediate way of doing this so far has been in the library itself with a regularly rotating Vinyl of the Month display, which is it's an effective visual signpost and lets people know about the collection within the space of the library itself. And we'll often share this on social media, and this is where we'll put records that tie in with our exhibitions as well. We've also posted features about this collection on the websites of the library and the wider South Bank Centre. So you can see a collections page on the Poetry Library's website on the left over there, highlighting LPs with particularly striking covers. And also pictured here is a piece on the South Bank Centre blog where library staff members each wrote a bit about one of their favourite records. That was a particularly fun one to put together. We got to take pictures in different parts of the library and everyone got to listen to records and pose with them. It was fun. As you can see from these examples, this collection provides a wealth of nice visual content for us to share as an invitation for people to come and explore what we have. As for the audio itself, a bi-monthly show on NTS Radio called Plastic Language draws largely from this collection, promoting the library to a substantial new audience and offering entry points into the genre for people who may not have already had an interest in poetry or an awareness of us as a library. Licenses such as PRS on NTS offer a bit more flexibility in disseminating this material than we're able to do through the library's own channels. I should clarify, this isn't an official Poetry Library radio show. It's a kind of extracurricular project that grows from and acknowledges this work. But I feel it demonstrates how versatile this versatile resource can capture imaginations and go beyond our usual audiences. Recent partnerships have also given us an opportunity to share this strand of the library's collections, in particular the Sound of the Year Awards, who approached the library in 2021 to partner on their Best Imagined Sound category, which is an invitation for someone to deploy their poetic skills and submit a description of a sound that doesn't yet exist. It's a fun invitation. This partnership essentially involves helping to promote the category through our digital channels, and this focus specifically on sound is the perfect springboard for us to sort of put a spotlight on these collections and to catch the attention of artists for whom sound is at the core of their practice. So now that the collection has been rehoused, developed and promoted, feedback so far has been broadly positive, with many library users spending a lot of time digging and listening, or even flicking through and making a note of things they've not yet come across that they're going to go and listen to later. One interaction that particularly stood out was that of a dad and a daughter. He was showing her how to use the turntable while exclaiming, "I can't believe they have this," which was quite validating. It felt like a good kind of intergenerational learning moment, as well as some good wholesome dad-daughter bonding. We've had a few people who haven't read poetry before or who are coming back to it after a long time of not reading it, who have told us that the audio has been their perfect entry point back into it. And often engagement with the collection is visible only in very subtle ways. It's anecdotal at most, but sometimes we find records put into display area by library users who have been rifling through the records. So some of you might have just noticed in one of the previous slides a Glenda Jackson reading Stevie Smith record. And we found that on the display recently. None of the staff members put it there, so presumably a library user came and put it there in tribute to the recently deceased actor, which we found very touching. And we didn't know that record, we didn't know it was there, so it's a nice way to find it, really. On the not so positive side, we have had library users expressing shock and concern, understandably, that these fragile objects are completely accessible to the public, again, especially when we're busy with children. But these conversations have really been helpful in feeding into how we're going to approach the next stage of storing these. So, and it's nice that people coming to us care about the collections. It's nice to hear them having that kind of feedback is useful. So looking ahead, we're looking at other ways of sharing and expanding our work with this collection. First and foremost, we're currently looking at copyright clearance training for staff so that we can do some more work in getting this unique audio out on our own channels. Our website and social media, for example, be this in the form of one of our website's poems of the day or as part of some kind of official Poetry Library podcast. Given the versatility of this material, there are a number of ways we could incorporate into new activities in the library's program. So listening parties have been discussed, as has the idea of commissioning poets or musicians, or even both, to respond creatively to the collection. And that's a nice thing about working in South Bank Centre. There are a lot of different departments doing quite a lot of interesting activities, so hopefully there can be cross-departmental collaborations with, for example, the music department. Yeah, we've been having conversations with different departments about it, which has been nice. At present, these are all just a few hypothetical ideas, but I feel they point positively in the direction of new entry points to the library and to poetry generally, as well as to the production of new creative work. And finally, it is important to acknowledge that while the emphasis of the library's collections is on physical material, we're aware of the current wealth of material being produced on born digital formats, such as podcasts, recordings of significant poetry events, and albums with digital-only releases. So at present, we're working on installing a user-friendly PC terminal thing for people to be able to browse and access the digitized audio material from the aforementioned audio digitization project. And once this work has been completed, we'll have an infrastructure in place for us to start thinking about collecting and sharing new kinds of born digital material. This is somewhat tangential to the current discussion of the physical, tactile, and visually arresting vinyl collection. And it's a subject that could probably fill another presentation on its own, but it's worth mentioning here as it's important to acknowledge that vinyl records represent only a fraction of sort of recorded poetry being produced today. So while on this note of thinking about the future, I'll close this presentation with a poem by Irish poet Patrick Kavanagh. The poem's called Having Confessed, and it's from a really nice record called Almost Everything. It was first released in 1964, then reissued last year as a double LP with the extra disc entirely dedicated to contemporary prominent Irish public figures, such as Aidan Gillen, Aisling Bea, and even Sharon Corr of The Cause, reading Kavanagh's poems over music. The library holds both the 1964 and the 2022 copies of the album, and I feel this is a really fitting symbol of the two periods of time most represented in our vinyl collection. The spirit of rediscovery, celebration, and the continuation of a creative lineage on this reissue chime with what we're trying to achieve with our work in this area. So I'll play this Patrick Kavanagh.
Having confessed, the poet feels that he should go down on his knees and pray.
Thank you for listening.